So welcome everyone to the very first session of this year's Animal Law Conference. This panel, entitled Getting to Know Your Client, will not only challenge us to appreciate just who farmed animals are as individuals, but will also shine a much needed light on the conditions in which they're raised and the framework of federal and state laws that contemplate or fail to contemplate their inherent interests. Speaking first, we have Joyce Tishler, whom many of you affectionately know as the mother of animal law and the co-founder of the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where she served as the executive director for some 25 years. Joyce is also one of the authors of the recently published Animal Law, New Perspectives on Teaching Traditional Law, which I believe is available for purchase here at the conference. In addition to being a practitioner and scholar, Joyce also teaches animal law courses all over the world, and next semester will be leading the Animals and Agriculture course at Lewis and Clark Law School. Second, we have Susie Costin, known as the Farm Animal Whisperer. Susie is a national shelter director for Farm Sanctuary and a leading authority on farm animal care and behavior. With more than 2 decades of experience working with farm animals, she calls on both her expertise and her deep connection with these animals to oversee a team of caregivers who provide individualized care to hundreds of rescued farm animals across Farm Sanctuary's shelter locations. Susie also acts as a mentor to peers who have started their own sanctuaries and advocates for compassion for farm animals everywhere. Please join me in welcoming them.
Good morning. Okay. All right. Can you hear me? All right? Okay, because there's not a whole lot I can do with that mic. Okay. First, I want to thank you for being here. I'm always happy to see people who are caring about the animals and learning how to protect them. That to me is where it's at. In this opening panel, we are going to introduce you to farmed animals from 2 perspectives. First, farmed animals as the nameless, faceless resources whose only purpose is to become food, and then farmed animals as the thinking, feeling, life-experiencing individuals we know them to be. I selected this first graphic because I find it quite offensive. Pigs, as we know, are highly intelligent, curious social beings. And anybody ever hung out with them? You don't have to raise your hand, yeah. They're fun. They're fun to hang out with. And they teach us that they're not an it, they're not a thing, they are a who. But the animal agriculture industry treats pigs as nothing more than pork-producing machines. So my assignment is to show you what happens when animals are reduced to it status. And throughout this conference, we are going to be asking the question, how can we change the horrific reality that farmed animals endure on a daily basis? We know that each year the American agribusiness sector raises and kills 9 to 10 billion farmed animals, which is such an extraordinary figure. How can you even deal with that? Most of these animals spend their entire lives in massive industrial factories, a system that was developed not over the ages, but just in the 1950s. It developed to maximize the output of meat, dairy, eggs, and minimize labor and other costs. Okay, that is an industrial facility in Duplin County, North Carolina, where it probably isn't there anymore after Hurricane Florence, and the animals, I'm sure, are not there, but they were. There were thousands of pigs living inside this industrial facility. They could not move freely, they would never feel the sun, they would never feel grass beneath their feet or breathe fresh air. They wouldn't do anything that was natural to a pig. And if they would become sick or injured, there would be no veterinary care. They would be left to suffer. If you want to get a feel for what their lives were like, imagine being strapped into a seat on an airplane, soiled seat, with putrid air and nothing to do for your entire life. Every aspect of industrialized animal agriculture is about denial of the suffering of the animals, denial of the damage that is done to air, water, soil, damage done to human health through the use of antibiotics, damage to the communities that live nearby, that have lived there for generations, oftentimes communities of color, poor people, abuse of the farm workers, and significant contribution to climate change. It's all about denial. For those of you who are familiar with the conditions that farmed animals are forced to live in, sorry I'm putting you through this again. It'll be a short refresher. I'll keep it short. For those of you for whom this is new information, I apologize to you because I'm going to be showing you what Carol Adams calls traumatic knowledge. But it's the only way I know how to show what is actually happening to these animals. Some of the slides are going to be hard to look at, so I don't mind if you look away. Farmed animals suffer due to intensive confinement. They are overcrowded, they can't move freely, they can't escape more aggressive animals, they can't run and play as calves would do if they were given the room. Pigs would root in the ground and they would sunbathe. Chickens would take dust baths and search for bugs. Well, they can't do any of that. Their bodies have been mutilated because the producers understand that in these crowded conditions, these animals would harm each other by pecking or fighting. So rather than improve the conditions, the producers debeak the birds and dehorn the cattle and castrate the males and cut off the tails. And all of this is done without anesthesia or without painkillers. And then the industry breeds these animals to maximize the way that they're going to produce what they're expected to produce, with little or no concern to how this impacts the animals themselves. And so we see turkeys. Turkeys are normally sleek, elegant birds, but factory-farmed turkeys have been bred to be monsters with massive breasts, can barely walk. Chickens who grow so fast that their skeletons can't keep up with the rate of their growth, and dairy cows who have these immense udders, totally unnatural. So let's get to the actual animals themselves. Approximately 6 million female pigs, called sows, spend their entire lives in intensive confinement. Most of these sows live in enclosures called crates, either gestation crates or farrowing crates, but the bottom line is they're in cages that are approximately 7 feet long by about 2 feet wide, only slightly larger than the sow herself. It is impossible for the sow to so much as turn around or even walk. And their waste falls into pits underneath them, so they're smelling this horrible air. And the hard flooring that is under them causes foot injuries and damaged joints. These are intelligent, self-aware animals who suffer mentally as well as physically. They live an endless cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, nursing, as if they were office copy machines, printing out endless copies. Pigs could live to be 10, 15 years old, but after about 2.5 years, these sows are sent to slaughter. And their babies are taken away from them after a few weeks. There's approximately 60 million pigs who are raised to be eaten in the U.S., and they live in crowded pens inside a massive building. Again, nothing to occupy their time, no soft bedding to lie on, significant air pollution in these buildings so that if the fans stop working, it would be deadly to the pigs and any humans in there. Chickens. Industry calls them broilers. They are raised to be eaten. And there are about 20,000 chickens in a building, again, living crowded together. They can't exhibit normal, natural behaviors in this kind of situation. And they're often forced to live in litter that has not been changed over time. It could be months, in some cases over years. So they're living in feces and urine. Since the 1950s, the poultry industry has selectively bred chickens to grow extremely fast. The rapid growth takes its toll on the chickens, of course. Their skeletons have trouble supporting this incredibly fast growth. They experience trouble walking. Their hearts and their lungs can't pump oxygen and blood to them as needed. And so they suffer from deformities caused by what's been done to them. Most egg-laying hens spend their whole lives in battery cages, stacked row upon row upon row, no place to perch, no way to get away from more aggressive birds, no privacy, no dust baths, no fresh air, no sunlight. You get it. You get what their lives are like. It's pretty awful and miserable. Many of them lose their feathers and their bodies are covered with sores and bruises, and even the so-called cage-free or free-range chickens are usually kept in massive buildings and subject to the kind of overcrowding you saw in prior slides. A century ago, hens would produce about 100 eggs per year. Today, hens have been selectively bred so that they produce 250 eggs per year, more than double what they used to. And the industry considers this a major achievement. Unfortunately, no one sent this memo to the chickens, and their bodies have a hard time dealing with the stress that's put upon them. After a few years, the chickens produce less eggs, and they are sent to slaughter to be sold as a cheaper form of chicken meat. The male chicks. Now, we all hear about how males are preferred in human society, but if you're a chicken, that doesn't work that way. The males can't lay eggs, so they are sent, well, they're not sent to slaughter, they're killed. They're killed as soon as they're born. The killing methods are really horrific. They're sucked through pipes onto an electrified kill plate, they're gassed, or as with here, they're ground up fully alive. The treatment of turkeys is similar to the treatment of chickens. They're crowded into these massive buildings. These buildings can house about 10,000 turkeys at a time. Our office is in Cotati, California, and there's a flock of wild turkeys that walks around town. They're absolutely adorable. They like to hang out at the police station for reasons I don't understand. But you can see them all over town, and they cross the streets, and people wait for them. Well, these turkeys have been selectively bred to grow massive breasts, which is completely unnatural. And they grow so fast that they have painful leg problems, and again, their hearts can't keep up with what it takes to pump blood, and they have heart attacks. They're very susceptible to heart attacks. In the industry, it's the cattle who are raised to be eaten who are least impacted by the crowding until the last few months of their lives when they are sent to feedlots like this one, and that's where they are fattened before they are sent to slaughter. And a feedlot can hold as many as 100,000 cattle. There's a famous ranch, Harris Ranch in Southern California, and as you drive down Route 5, you can smell when you're getting close to Harris Ranch. I mean, it's quite obvious. Dairy cows are amongst the worst treated. In order to produce milk, cows, like all other mammals, have to go through pregnancy and childbirth. And these industrialized dairy cows spend their entire lives being pregnant, giving birth, and then producing milk. The calves are taken away from their mothers within 1 to 3 days because the industry wants to get the cows right back into production as soon as possible. But there's no thought given to how distressing this is to the mother and the child. If you tried to take my baby away from me when she was born, I would have killed you. These cows are no different. They are highly social creatures capable of having relationships that last their entire lives, and this one gets broken right away. The industry's selective breeding has created dairy cows who produce twice as much milk as they did just 40 years ago. And this massive increase in milk production takes a terrible toll on their bodies. They often experience painful lameness, painful mastitis, and when you hear of a downed cow, too sick or too injured to walk into the slaughterhouse, that final degradation, that cow usually comes from the dairy industry. A cow can live to be 15, 20 years old, but after 3 or 4 years of producing huge amounts of milk, most dairy cows are sent to slaughter and made into hamburger. Once again, the males are not needed by the dairy industry because they don't produce milk, so they're either sent to slaughter immediately or raised like this and then sent to slaughter to be sold as veal. Joanne, look familiar? This is a Joanne MacArthur photo. I love her photos, and if you haven't gone to the We Animals website, please do. Some of the most powerful photos you'll ever see are there. The purpose of forcing dairy cows to give birth is to enable them to produce milk, as I said. Time is money, so the female calves are removed from the mother as quickly as possible. Joanne took this a few hours after this calf was born, I believe. Huh? 20 minutes after this calf was born. How sad. And the calf was still wet from birth. This normally playful and active baby would live separated from her mother and separated from others until she would be old enough to be introduced into the dairy herd and exploited just like her mother. Foie gras is the French term for fatty liver. It comes from force-feeding ducks or geese. A pipe is inserted down their throats and mash is pumped directly into their stomachs over about a 1-month period, several times a day over a 1-month period. What happens is this causes their livers to swell to 8 or more times their normal natural size, which is very painful, a great deal of suffering. And then this diseased liver is sold as a high-priced gourmet delicacy called foie gras. And so on and so forth. Rabbits, deer, sheep, goats, untold numbers of fish and other animals suffer similarly in the industrial animal agriculture world that we have imposed on them. Now, other panels are going to talk about the laws that relate to farmed animals, but this is a spoiler alert. I want to quickly just give you thumbnail sketches of those laws, so if you don't want to hear it, just cover your ears and wait till the next panel comes. There is no federal law covering farmed animals while they are being raised. I'm going to say that again because that's such an extraordinary thing. There is no federal law in existence that offers any protection to the animals who are being raised in these industrialized facilities. Really? How did that happen? You think they just forgot? Okay, state level. There are state anti-cruelty laws, as we know, in every state, but the majority of U.S. states expressly exempt farmed animals from the coverage of the cruelty laws. And they also exempt the standard or customary practices. What are those practices? Debeaking, dehorning, forced molting, it goes on and on. All of those practices that cause harm to animals are exempted. They're not defined as cruel. And so these animals have no protection, none whatsoever. Now, they do have a federal humane transport law, the 28-hour law, which is horribly underenforced, and the coverage is limited to transportation, not the 99% of the time that they're being raised. It doesn't apply to poultry, chickens, ducks, turkeys, who are by far the largest number of animals being raised by the U.S. They do have the Federal Humane Methods of Livestock Slaughter Act, which requires that livestock be quickly rendered insensible to pain before being killed, except that doesn't apply to kosher, halal, or ritual slaughter, and it does not apply to animals while they are being raised in intensive confinement, and it is poorly enforced. Okay, breathe. Whew. I've beat you up for too long. So I'm going to show you some nice pictures to end my session. I want to show you slides of our clients, the way they should look. Self-aware individuals whose lives and well-being matter to them. There they are, they're rooting, they're busy, they're with their families. That's the way it ought to be. Free to walk on grass, free to feel the warmth of the sun, free to explore the world as it is. Intelligent, curious, who, he, she, they, not it, not thing. And elegant, natural, living their lives on their own terms, according to their needs. Or swimming in their own habitat as they should. And finally, as in the case of Howie the steer lived his life at Animal Place in California. He was rescued as a young calf, And he was one of the few who was able to live out his life in a natural setting. And look at that face, totally zen, totally affectionate. So thank you. I am deeply humbled and happy that you are here. It means that my work is done. You came, you entered the field, and the animals desperately need you. So thank you for being here.
Hi, it's very hard to follow that. I'm actually going to talk about, and I went through this a million times, like who should I pick and who should I talk about? And every one of them has such strong personalities and such deep stories. We have about 1,000 animals right now at all our locations, and there's not one of them that doesn't have a story. So I tried to pick an animal that a lot of people relate to, and not, I don't know how I'm using this, we'll find out. Yes. So I'm going to talk about the floods. And the reason I'm doing that, the first floods that we went to were in 2008. I'm talking about the floods because it just happened again. The reason that it's so in the media right now is because we have social media. There was not real big social media. There was no coverage when we went down in 2008. Close to 20,000 pigs died. Like, that's so many animals in one location. And the reason I'm talking about pigs is because I could go into detail. I talk usually about 4 hours when I'm talking about animals. So I was going to pick 2 individuals, and I'm starting with pigs. So 20,000 pigs died in these floods. When we went down, there were pigs that weren't let out of the farms. They weren't let out of the barns, so most of them ended up drowning. Out of the 20,000, only 69 of these pigs actually survived that flood. And we took all 69, and somebody just broke some glasses. This is terrible. Glad that curtain's not open. So we had permission to go down. One of the big things that's happening now is everybody just runs down to these floods and tries to take them out. You have to have legal permission. We were actually asked by the state of Iowa to come down, and the reason was pigs are very good at going feral, and they did not want feral pigs. They were very upset about the fact that these giant pigs were going to become feral pigs. In the case of the Iowa farms, no charges were actually brought against the farmers. I'm doing my warning graphic slide because I was told to. Mine are not as graphic as yours, so relax. It's going to be easy. So these are the floods, though. So these pictures were actually taken by best friends. I put one up during the North Carolina flooding, and everybody grabbed it, but this was taken by a person from Best Friends when they were going around in boats looking to see what the damage was, and they were actually looking for wildlife and had no idea what they were going to find when they went down there. And this is just one of the many scenes. These animals died by the tens of thousands. This wasn't just a small thing. This was a really giant industrial disaster. And these pigs are desperate. And this is the first time they've actually been outside. And this is not the way to go on the outside thing. But the one thing that happened, and I had never met a gestation sow until I went to Iowa. And this is one of the first ones I met, and her name was Rose. And Rose's story is probably one of the saddest, and it's the thing that we see the most, besides the physical damage that's done to these animals, and there is a lot. What you were just talking about with all of the different things that they do to their bodies, yes, they have so many physical ailments. These pigs arrived with MRSA. They arrived with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It took 6 months of quarantining them because they were so sick. They had third-degree burns all over their bodies from the sun. They'd never been outside. This was such a just giant disaster for these animals. But the 69 that got out, it's the best possible thing that could have happened to them. Rose, though, was one of the ones, because besides the physical abuse, what I was trying to get to was the psychological things that happen to these animals are probably the thing you'll recognize the most if you start to see them when you pull them out of the industry. So what you didn't see is those are dead babies behind Rose. Rose was a gestation sow. She had her first litter for the first time. She found a place to have her babies, just like every pig does. She made a nest, but she didn't have any milk because she was starving to death, because she went 11 days without food and water. So when we got there, instead of this starving pig trying to eat her own babies, which everybody says they will, and is the reason they say they're in crates, is because they'll kill their babies, she was trying to get them up. She was still working on trying to revive these babies. So they're not killers. They're not killers. They're amazing. So the only way we could get her in the trailer was to bring the dead babies in too. So We also rescued other gestation sows. All of them were sunburned. All of them were in bad shape. They had really crazy bent legs. And to me, they looked like teenagers. And when I asked a vet down there, this is what she told me. Oh, God, they're old. They're like at least 3. My pigs lived to be 15. Like 3 years old is not the end of your life. And this is how broken these bodies are. But psychologically, they are destroyed. I'll have to show you at the end because I did put the eyes at it again at the end. And the only thing, not us, we didn't save Rose. That pig saved Rose. That's Nikki. The only reason that Nikki came in was she was a gestation sow with babies. She had made a nest and 7 of her babies lived. Most of the mothers had about 20 babies. So 7, she didn't get to save them all, but she saved 7 and she is a tough mother. But she wasn't as broken because she wasn't as old. Like she really still had that instinct in her to protect those babies. Rose was dead inside. It was like there was nothing left. She didn't try to fight us. She didn't do anything. Nikki, on the other hand, did try to fight us, which I'll talk about later. She almost hurt a lot of people. She's really amazing. But Nikki was the only reason that Rose started to eat. Rose didn't eat. We had them in a stockyard for almost a month because we couldn't legally take them out of the state until they were healthy. And they weren't really healthy when we took them. But we had to wait and we had to get them healthy enough to travel. And so when Nikki came, Rose would eat if I put her food by Nikki so she could see the babies, because all she wanted was the babies. And so Nikki, being an awesome pig, because she was the best pig I ever knew, when we got home, allowed Rose to help her raise her babies. So this is Nikki going to Rose. You can see Rose in the back, and you can see her face, and she's still just destroyed. Like that face to me spoke like volumes, because she was never, ever, like it felt like she was dead inside. But Nikki allowed her to be a part of her family, and so then you can see Rose. So Rose is the pig on the left, or am I right? No, on the right. Pig on the right. I'm looking the wrong direction. And behind her is another piglet, but these are all the piglets as they grew up. So she got to raise the piglets with the other mother. And that's the thing that saved her. So that's the thing that we see when they come in. They are psychologically destroyed, and you have to allow them to just be pigs. We didn't care if Rose ever liked us. It wasn't about us getting our picture taken with Rose. It wasn't about us getting Rose to think that we were the greatest people on earth. We didn't save her. Another animal did, because all they want to do is be with their people. And so what happened in the end is one of the older males from the baby group kicked out one of the sisters. And instead of the mother helping out, Rose would go and sleep with the baby outside because she wasn't allowed in the barn, and that's Rory. So Rose and Rory spent the rest of their life together until Rose died. And sadly, Rose died because she had an antibiotic-resistant infection, which is what they all end up getting when they come out of the industry, because they are so filled with antibiotics. But because of that pig and this other gestation sow, not because of Farm Sanctuary and our great care got her physically through this, but psychologically they need each other. These are herd and flock animals. So looking back, that is what Rose looked like when we got her, and that is what Rose looked like probably a couple years before she died. So the difference is night and day. Their psychological needs are not even close to being met. Their physical needs are not met. Nothing is met in an industrial farm. But that is why I'm going to another case. So another pig from another case, and this is a local case. We just did this year. 80 pigs were removed, probably a few more than 80, were removed from 2 sheds. They were so overcrowded. It was in Cattaraugus County. Cattaraugus County actually has an animal registry, an animal abuse registry. It's the only county I know of, I think right now, in New York. You guys are lawyers, you should know this. But if you abuse an animal in Cattaraugus County, you can't have animals again now, which is amazing. So that means you have to move. And some of them do, but some of them don't move. So they can't have animals again. So when he was removed from the farm, he was arrested. So he's in jail still, and that was in January. So this was a pretty big deal. That doesn't happen to the 20,000 pigs that died. The 80 pigs that were suffering, it did. So it's a lot easier to get these smaller cases, but they actually do help you talk about the pigs. So that's what we're going to do. I remember it was 7 degrees when I went there. It was in January. It was horrible. I had to be there at 6 in the morning. I hadn't had coffee, wasn't in a mood. So I'm driving, and I see the shed off to the side. And when I saw it, there was no tracks, no nothing. It was closed up. And I remember being like, there's no way there's animals in that shed, because that wasn't the location. The next place was the location. So I was like, there's no way. There were animals in that shed. There were 50 pigs in that shed. So 50 pigs crammed side by side in that shed. They had mange, they were full of roundworm, they were dying. There was dead pigs in there that were underneath the live pigs. They hadn't been fed for days. They were on feces so high that I had to be propped up to get into the barn. Some of them, their heads could almost touch the ceiling because the feces was so high. The air was so bad that you could not breathe when you walked in. I had to wear a mask. I actually felt nauseous when I went in, and your eyes burned. These animals have sensitive senses of smell. They have a sense of smell that makes us look like we've never smelled anything in our lives. They can smell 12 inches under the soil. They're living in their own filth. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it happens all the time. But the saddest part was when we put a light on them to see who was in there, that was their reaction. Because they've been living in the dark, they were terrified. I have never seen animals react like that. It was terrifying for them. And they screamed and they piled on each other. And we had to pull pigs off of each other just to get them out because they were so frightened. Because this man was also notorious for hitting the animals with shovels. There was a lot of physical damage to these animals as well. But then we met Mia. So this is Mia. I was told the night before that she had had 17 babies. By the time we got there were only 8 left. They had died. She hadn't had food for 2 days. She was not producing enough milk. She was so incredibly frightened, but not like a gestation sow frightened, not dead like Rose, more like almost made me dead, like, like I was the dead one in this situation. I had to scale a wall to get her babies out while she tried to attack me the whole time because that is what they're supposed to do. That's their job. They're really great mothers. And that's the thing that's so crazy about industrialized farming. I mean, it's not crazy. Actually, it makes all the sense in the world. You don't put a mother and her babies in a place where she's going to be able to hurt you if you try to take them. That doesn't make sense. Not very productive. I mean, you can't take the babies away. She was a prime example since she ripped the doors off of our hospital and almost destroyed 3 caregivers' lives. Yeah, she's amazing. So this is her at home. We actually, because her babies were so small and she hadn't had enough milk, we had to weigh them all the time to make sure they were gaining weight. And that was when we would get her to go outside with food and close the doors, and she ripped all the doors down to get back in with the babies, because when you touch a baby pig, they scream. Very good defense mechanism if your mom is loose. And she actually had one of my caregivers wedged between a locked door and a sliding door and was just slamming the door against her. And I was in my office and I could hear her screaming, and I was like, I should go down. But yeah, so they are such great mothers. They're great mothers. Those babies come up to them every morning and they do this little thing on their mouth. These tiny little 2-pound babies go up to these giant females and talk right at their mouth. And the mother just lays down carefully, and she never, those babies were buried in the straw. I almost stepped on them. She never once stepped on them. We don't give them a chance to just be who they are. That's the stink eye. That's the eye that we all got. I took that picture because every time I tried to take a video, she bit at my phone. So I was like, oh, forget it. So I went on the other side of the fence, and I call that my favorite stink eye picture because it is. But that was the look we all got, because she was just like, no one is taking this group. She'd had babies taken. And once you've had your baby stolen from you multiple times, that's not happening a couple times. Like, now that she had the space and the freedom to protect those babies, she took full advantage of it, because that's who they are. So this is her now. Well, not now, because the babies are bigger. That's her with Wayne. And she's with her babies, and her life is fantastic. And I learned the hard way, because Joanne MacArthur was taking pictures on the farm. You're in every presentation. But Joanne came to take pictures on the farm, and it texted me about, is it okay if I go in with the pigs? And I was like, oh, yeah. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, my God. So I ran down, and she was in with Mia and her babies. But Mia didn't do anything to her. And it was like she finally got to a point where she trusts us now, and she loves us now, and she loves her babies. This is her. She's very awesome, doing what pigs do best, laying in the mud. Oh, 7. I got all the time in the world. And these are her eyes now, and that's what I want you to look at, because the biggest issue that we see besides the physical abuse, and there's tons of it, like physically, it takes us, again, 6 months to get pigs back to shape usually, because they're just so sick when they come in from the industry. But the biggest thing that these industries and all of farming does to these animals is psychologically breaks them. That's the goal. You can't do the things you do. You can't take mothers' calves away from them. You can't take piglets away from their mothers. You can't do any of the things that are done in any type of farming without physically and emotionally breaking these animals, or you would die. Like, when you let them do what they're supposed to do, you will get hurt if you do the wrong thing. You have to learn to let them just be who they are. So come to a sanctuary and really meet these animals, because once you get to know them too, you can fight for them. You can really fight for them because you can understand them. I just had a law student spend, I think, it was like 2 months, just sitting every day in our cow pasture, watching the relationship between a mother cow and a baby, and watching a relationship between a mother cow who started producing milk for a baby we took in that was not her baby. She actually produced milk and protected that baby like it was her own, because all her babies had already passed and were taken away. So they're so complex, and their stories are just so rich. So come to a sanctuary and do research and really get to know who they are, and fight that fight, and thank God you're all here because they need your help. So thank you so much.
So we have approximately 20 minutes for Q&A. So there's a microphone here and a microphone here if folks just want to line up.
If you don't ask questions, I'm going to sing. It's not going to be pretty.
Sorry, I'm all the way over here now. I just had a question about the gestation crates. I can't remember which one of you mentioned that, they were put in gestation crates for the excuse of something like they would hurt their babies. But, I mean, obviously that's not true. Is that really just an excuse, or is there more an industrial reason for it? And could you explain that more?
Yeah, there's a huge industrial reason for it. If you put an animal in a packed area, so what we're trying to do in industrial farming is crowding as many animals as we can, because then production goes up. Because there's not enough space to have farrowing cells. There's not. I mean, a farrowing cell needs full space. Nikki was a prime example. She found a space, and her babies were actually living in this giant, like when she would make a call, they would run into a brush pile, but she had made a nest for them. They need space. So because we crowded them, that's the first problem. So yes, in an industrial farm, if they weren't in crates, they would squish their babies because there's no room for them to walk. So that's why they do it. But I think the number one reason they do that is for complete control, because they do artificial insemination on these pigs. So that's the first thing. You can't just artificially inseminate a loose pig. You can't. Trust me, anything that's done with a loose pig needs to be done with peanut butter. That's the only way to work. I'm not kidding. We put all our meds in peanut butter sandwiches because don't even try to mess with a pig. They are so powerful. They're amazing. So you can't do the things that make industrialized farming work unless you put them in confinement, and that's why they work. And so yeah, we have this giant pen that's like, I think it's like 10 by 20 that we put our mother pigs in. Nobody's ever hurt a piglet in that pen. So if they were given a 10 by 20 space, no one would die, but they're given this much.
I'll go ahead and ask the next question. This one I think is specifically for Joyce. You mentioned at the end of your slides that there's really kind of no federal law that protects the interests of animals while they're being raised. And is it potentially a good thing for there being no federal law with potentially kind of an implicit or explicit kind of preemption of state laws, so that my impression is that the federal standards would be so low that it really would be almost ineffective, or kind of essentially echo what we see at the state level. So is there some kind of hope that, or some opportunity to exact change at the state level because there is no federal law?
Oh, Raj, you wishful individual. I was making fun when I said, golly, why did that happen, that there's no federal law? And the reason there is no federal law is that this is an industry that has not been challenged until the animal protection movement began challenging around 1999, 2000. So the industry has been completely in control, both at the state and the federal level. If you ever watch when presidents come to power, there's usually a Tyson or a Purdue or backing them. So there is such an integration of industry lobby with government, both at the federal and state level, that's why there's no law. They get their way completely. And Raj is right. If there were a federal law, it would be so completely watered down that it would probably be absolutely useless. One hope that I have, and this may be naive on my part, is that we will be able to overturn the state exemptions. Most states exempt farmed animals from and that may be naive, because at the state level, the state legislators are equally controlled by industry. So how's it going to change? Well, stay tuned. This whole conference is about how it's going to change, and you're going to see various things that have been tried and will be tried.
I thank you very much for your very moving presentations, both of you. A political question that kind of builds off this last question, and then a psychology question. The political question is, what state have you found has done the best job in trying to stitch together kind of novel coalitions to try to take on the agribusiness lobby? In other words, you think of the animal protection movement, but in some states, public health groups, some states, faith groups, some case wealthy landowners. I'm particularly seeing that in Indiana, where I'm from. And so I would appreciate your thoughts about other states where you're seeing broad-based coalitions come together to take on the agribusiness lobby. And then I'll wait for my second question.
Do you want to?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm an animal person, that's all I do. Farm girl.
In the states where farmed animals are not exempt from the cruelty laws, there's been the ability to litigate in ways that we can't when states have ag-gag laws or exempt farmed animals. So obviously, states like California, where I live, it's easier to litigate in those states. In terms of state-level coalitions, well, there's SRAP. Most of it's been done by national organizations, to be honest. I mean, I don't mean to take away credit from the state groups, but HSUS really was behind monetarily, as well as in terms of their employees, behind the state-level initiatives that have banned some practices. So, and those things cost millions of dollars. So they would work with the state folks, the citizens of the states, but it started with Florida and the gestation crate initiative, and then went to other states.
I'm Prop 12 now.
Yeah. Now the problem with that is that only a few states have the initiative process. So, they've covered the states that have the initiative process. And so the question I'm sure everybody's asking is, okay, so how do we get through this? How do we get over this high wall of no law and an industry that really controls the legislation? One answer that I come up with is consumer pressure. When I talked to Dennis Treacy, he's now with the Smithfield Foundation, but we had invited him to come to conferences, a couple of conferences ago, and when I asked him why Smithfield was willing to phase out gestation crates, he said, consumer pressure. So we have to be opportunistic when it comes to farmed animals, because we have such a blank slate. We've got to find those holes and find ways to get into the gaps and build laws. I mean, we're really at ground zero when it comes to farmed animals. It's extraordinary.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second question, very different question, is about... Yes, it's a psychological question, and that is that obviously I often hear that farmers and farm workers become very desensitized to the cruelty, the emotional and physical cruelty that they level on these farm animals. And my question is, if you could share any stories of where they've seen the light. I know there have been some documentaries on this very topic, but I don't know, in your own personal journeys, have you observed this situation of repentance and trying to then be transformative agents for animals?
I think it's sad, because I don't think it's easy to repent when you are wealthy. The problem is most of the people that are in this system are abused just the same way the animals are abused. These are very poor people. They prey on the weak in every aspect of factory farming. So it's easy to repent if you can feed your family. I think that's part of the problem, is we're not... I think somebody needs to start a group where, like, you shut down like a dairy, because all these small dairies are closing down. Shut down a dairy and teach people how to do something else. Seth had a slide about that, by the way, which was very impressive, because we've abused the people in this system just as much. It's kind of almost elitist. It's like most people that are into animal rights are into animal rights because we can be. It's very hard if you're trying to feed a family and you have nothing, and they take advantage of that. A lot of the people that come out and do fight back, because there are some people, but most of them are higher up in the food chain, may I say, in that farm, because read things like Every 12 Seconds and all these books where they have gone undercover and seen the workers, because the workers are abused. And a lot of people like Timothy Petrot, when he did that book, actually was doing it as a social justice for people. So he didn't go in even doing this as an animal rights thing. He went in to say migrant workers are being abused in this system, and how they actually even within the system have prejudices against people that are doing certain jobs within the system. It's such a crazy system. So I have had people, most of the people that we've had as whistleblowers, we had one that did an audio tape, was only doing it to hurt the farm. He actually didn't care about the animals. So I know there are a couple stories of that. Howard Lyman's a great one. But it's very, very rare for someone who is just a worker who is almost, who is also being abused to step up. And I think they all feel horrible about it. I think it does desensitize. But I don't think it desensitizes completely. I think they have it split up in a lot of ways too. So not one person is doing all the evil deeds. So it's kind of like a group mentality. It's tough. I don't know the answer for that one. Do you know of anyone that's kind of come around?
It's a pervading problem. We wonder why this system came about, and I'm sure some folks are going to talk about that. And really, it was the processors, the slaughterhouses, that wanted uniformity. They wanted to be able to work round the clock and kill animals about the same size, as many as they could do per hour. And so they began dealing only with the larger producers. And that forced so many smaller producers to go out of business. So when we wonder why farming communities have been eliminated, it wasn't animal rights people, it was their own industry that forced them to become bigger and bigger or go out of business. Now, some years ago, my brother, who is a small animal vet, was invited to be on this state of California Veterinary Medical Association committee. And they were taken around to different places, and they were taken to a veal farm, and there were large animal vets and there were small animal vets, and those are two different breeds of cat. They were looking at these veal calves in their confinement stalls, and my brother was outraged. He was not an animal rights person. We used to fight about this. He was outraged because he was looking at a calf, and the large animal vets were looking at the same calf and saying, yep, looks fine to me. And my brother was saying, if this calf was brought into my clinic, I would immediately start to treat him for all of the problems that he's got. This is a sick calf. Two vets, both looking at the same calf, but seeing very different things because one is acculturated to working for industry and the other doesn't work for industry. So yeah, we do get brainwashed, and we all do in ways.
Yeah, on top of that, I talk about this all the time because we work with Cornell a lot. They're fantastic. They can save anybody, I'm telling you. They're a fantastic school. But one of the things is every time a new resident comes in, they always refer to, if you take your cat there, by the way, or your dog, they're like, how's little Luke doing? He's such a cutie. And you take a calf in there and they're like, it needs this, it needs that. They have been desensitized because they have to be. But one of the things that we hear, I should have turned my phone off. One of the things that we hear is that they love seeing and treating our animals because A, they're learning how to do medicine on animals they've never been able to treat, but B, they know that they're not going to die. So they're allowing themselves to get attached to them because they're not, humans want to be attached to them, they do. But if you're put in a position where you can't be, you have to learn to just, keep pushing through. And it's very sad. We do that with people too, though. We desensitize ourselves and rationalize. We're really good at it.
Hello.
Hi.
I'd like to give everybody some hope here. Is anybody here familiar with this activist group called Direct Action Everywhere, DXE? I encourage you to follow, but they are making a difference right now. They're based out of Berkeley, California. They're now in Utah. They have confronted the egg business. They've gone into these factory farms, and they've been subject to arrest. but they are persevering. They're having some kind of a training session in November in Utah. But I encourage you to follow what they're doing because they are making a difference. They're confronting the egg industry. They're at some cost to, their reputations, et cetera, but they're doing a lot of good work.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for your presentation. I just had a follow-up question regarding the new laws that affect gestation crates. I was curious, in those unique cases where laws have outlawed gestation crates, how are the pigs now raised? And how is that, are there other issues that are arising as a result of removing them from cages? Not that we all don't want that, but I was just curious, how is the industry changing as a result of removing them from cages?
They're moving to states that don't do that. I think that's mostly what happens, because I don't think that we've shut down that industry. I was lucky somebody took me to New Zealand, because I definitely wouldn't have done that on my own, just out of laziness. But they have farrowing cells everywhere, and you don't see them in the United States that often. In most of the states, I think in Florida, where they banned gestation crates, it wasn't a large state. Like if you banned gestation crates in North Carolina or Iowa, that would be a game changer. There are 21 million pigs right now in Iowa. So huge game changer, but if you ban them in Florida, it does ban that practice, but I think it's more of like keeping them out. Wouldn't that be it?
Yeah.
Shutting them down.
When I was teaching Sarah Hannikin's somewhere here, and I was teaching a class in farmed animal law at John Marshall in Chicago, and I invited Dennis Treacy to come talk to the class, and this was just about the time that Smithfield was starting to take the sows out of gestation crates, and they were really worried. They set up these units, these MASH units, basically, triage units, because they thought, oh my God, the pigs are going to fight. It's going to be really bloody. It'll be really awful. And what they did was that the pigs did not get outdoors, but they did get out of the crates, so that they were in more group housing inside. And they created these feeding stalls so that the pig had to go completely into what was effectively a crate in order to eat, and then come back out. No other pig could get at the food. So what they did was deal with the problem of pigs fighting over food. And Tracy said, it's going so well that we're going to speed up the process. We haven't had fights. There's not bloodshed. The pigs are doing fine. So getting them out of the gestation crates, it wasn't a panacea. They weren't going out on grass, but it was a lot better for the pigs.
Yeah, I haven't seen, are there a lot of those? I'm asking a question too. Are there a lot of those houses? Yeah, I've only seen gestation houses, yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know how many there are. I think it's like, it's not as extreme, obviously, because there's not as many, but it's not, well, there are as many pigs. It's not as extreme as going from like battery to cage-free. And when you see pigs, like if you see them in trailers and you see them in trucks, they are, like I've gone, like when we've taken animals out of these gestation facilities, or non-gestation facilities, especially the feeder barns, they do fight. I mean, pigs are territorial. So I think, again, I could see why the industry would be scared to try to cram them into buildings, because they have like really sharp, especially when they're starting to grow their tusks, they do cut each other up a lot. But again, it's all about confinement. Like these animals, when they're given enough space, clearly aren't going to fight or kill their babies. I haven't seen those, though. I'm very interested, so now I'm going to look when I get out of here, because I haven't seen a lot of them.
Hi. So my life's work is politics and animal rights. And something that I've noticed many times over the years is when you're running a political campaign and you get different supporters, and you try to think about, well, why is this person supporting this or that? And it all comes down to coalition building. And I'm wondering how animal lawyers are using coalition building to further the law on behalf of animals. So a good example was we were just talking about farm worker rights, which is so important. And there's other social justice groups out there who touch on what we're doing. So is there interesting work happening with other groups as well?
Yeah, I don't want to steal thunder from other speakers, and we're going to be talking about that starting with the next panel. But yeah, there's a lot of coalition building that's going on. With regard to farmed animals, not only are we forming coalitions with other animal protection groups, but we're also forming coalitions with groups of farmers and environmentalists and food safety people and public health advocates. What's one of the things that's really interesting about industrialized farming is that it intersects with a lot of other causes and problems. And so the ability to build a bigger tent is very much present and being taken advantage of.
I'll just do this.
I feel your pain.
I have a question about gestation crate bans, and if those are applied to, for instance, ag colleges, where they are teaching college kids to be future factory farmers.
Yeah.
Is there any way to force implementation of something like a gestation crate ban onto an educational setting?
You know, I would love to see what we've been able to do in the law profession. I'd love to see that happen with other kinds of professional level schools. I mean, we've been able to bring animal law to, you know, there, how many, 200 chapters that we have and 150 plus animal law classes. Wouldn't it be wonderful if ag schools and doctors and you know, medical schools, and they do actually, veterinary schools all had that kind of internal pressure from the students to create change. I'm teaching right now at UC Davis Law School, and I invited someone from the animal welfare program. I don't, it's not called that, but something like that. These are scientists who study the stresses that farmed animals are under in intensive confinement in industrialized ag. And it's really interesting to talk to them. I brought the dairy person in, and she talked about the problems that cows face. And what they're doing is they accept the system as it is. What can we do to increase the welfare of the animal within the system as it is? So we come from different places, but we're both concerned about the welfare of the cows. And I see that as something that is starting to spread, even in the animal ag schools, that they are concerned about the welfare. It'd be nice to get them concerned about the welfare in a different way, to get them out of that horrible industrialized system. But they're very conscious of it, and they care about the animals in their own way. I hope I'm making sense. You know, it's a different way than I care about the animals. I would end the industrialized system, but they're trying to create greater welfare. This woman told a story of she'd been out to a farm and all the cows had broken tails. And so she asked the farmer why the cows had broken tails and why did he break their tails. And he said, well, I've never broken a cow's tail. I would never do that. And she said, well, look at the shape of the tail. And he was mortified when he realized that he thought that crack was like when you crack your fingers. You know, the crack of the tail was like when you just crack your fingers. He didn't realize he was breaking their tails. And he was mortified when he realized that.
They tail them,
yeah, and changed because of that. So I don't know, that's one small example of where people who are doing animal welfare work can help farmers be better at what they do, but tiny example.
Yeah, Cornell's doing that too. I'm speaking at Cornell next month, or this month actually, on a panel, and they bring their law students to the sanctuary every year. And they are very interested. So there's a hope that you guys can like maybe penetrate into the Cornell and UC Davis system, because there's law schools at both. So I think there's going to be crossover soon. And I do think there's a lot more interest in welfare, at least on that level.
And I do believe we are out of time. Please join me in thanking Joyce Tishler and Susie Costin.
I need a month for this.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I know, it's great.